Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on AI power and misinformation offered by the Knowledge for Change Tkaronto Hub, which is the Ontario Council for International Cooperation, the University of Toronto Scarborough Knowledge Equity Lab, and the Toronto Centre of Learning and Development. My name is Shahara Tukorala, the Learning and Impact Specialist at OCIC, and I would like to begin today's webinar with a land acknowledgement. We recognize and honor the Indigenous peoples who have historically and do presently live and work on the traditional, both treaty and unceded territories that we operate on. These include the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation, and many others. We acknowledge that our staff, board, volunteers, and members and the broader community operate on the treaty and unceded territories of these and numerous other Indigenous peoples and nations. As we reflect on the role within a settler colonial context, we acknowledge the importance of naming the Indigenous peoples and the nations on whose lands we live, work, and play, and understand the importance of framing our engagement in the international cooperation sector and beyond through the lens of reconciliation and decolonization. We recognize that we have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples who have and continue to fight for social justice on their own lands. I know many of you are joining in person, also in your campus, in a classroom, as well as online. So throughout the webinar, for those of you who are online, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or to raise your hand if you would like to speak. But for those of you who are joining in a classroom, please let Leslie know so that you can ask your questions. For those of you who are online, the chat box is on the bottom center of your Zoom page. And you can access the raise hand function by clicking on the participants list and looking beside your name. If you have any questions or you need any support technical related to Zoom, please write to us in the chat box. Please make sure to keep your sound muted unless you have raised your hand and have been invited to speak by the moderator. If you are comfortable, for those of you who are online, please switch on your camera. It helps to make the session more engaging and connected. The meeting will be recorded and will be shared with participants and on each of our partner websites. So we ask all participants to please commit to our code of conduct shared in the chat, which outlines our shared commitment towards respect, inclusion, humility, safety, solidarity, and openness for all participants and collaborators. If you see or experience in conflict with the code of conduct, please do not hesitate to write to us directly, and we will respond as best as we can. I now invite Malika Daya to introduce the partners, moderator, and the speakers of today's event. Malika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shahara. Hi, everyone. My name is Malika Daya. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the coordinator for the Knowledge Equity Lab and a member of the Knowledge for Change Tkaronto Hub. We're so excited that you're all joining us today. For those of you who might be new to our work, the K4C Tkaronto Hub was co-founded back in 2019 by the Knowledge Equity Lab, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, the Toronto Centre for Learning and Development, and the Ontario Council for International Cooperation. We're also a part of a global UNESCO Knowledge for Change consortium, which now includes 22 hubs globally. Our shared goal, both globally and locally, is to support transformative change by strengthening research capacity for the co-creation of knowledge. That means bringing together practitioners, community researchers, community groups, and academics to center community-based participatory action research, or what we call CBPAR. This year, our hub is focusing on an innovation lab, exploring how we can center community participatory knowledge co-creation in the age of AI. So today's webinar is a part of that larger initiative. We're hosting 2 webinars this fall. the one you're at today, and another coming up on November 20th called Imagining Otherwise. That session will look into participatory and Indigenous visions of AI, grounded in relational ways of knowing and being. We really hope you could join us for that. And in the new year, dates to be announced, we'll be hosting an in-person innovation lab where we'll dive deeper into CBPAR methods to explore what AI could look like if it were shaped by our community values. The goal is to embed relational and equitable approaches into AI design and practice to equip participants with tools to engage in ethical, community-driven projects that align with sustainable development goals. And so if you're interested in that, we'd love to have you join us for this journey with the Innovation Lab. Before we begin, I just want to introduce the organizers here in the room. So starting with OCIC, we have Kimberly Gibbons. If you see Kimberly on your screen, she'll wave to you. We have Pragya Tiku, we have Shahara Atukorala, and then from the Center of Learning and Development, we have Elham Rosalian, and from the Knowledge Equity Lab, we have Leslie Chan, we have Maggie Huang, and we have myself. And so thank you again for joining us today. Before we begin and we introduce our very special guests, I have two links for you guys. The first is a Padlet QR code. So you are welcome to engage with this Padlet QR code throughout the webinar, adding questions, quotes, reflections. I've kind of already started it. It's a participatory tool we can use. If Denisse or Angela say something you're really excited about, please add it to the Padlet. And this can continue to be a shared knowledge resource for us even after the webinar. And Leslie students, please register. U of T students registration link. This is super important so we know that you are here, we know that we can update you, and you can continue to be a part of this Innovation Lab community. So do register. I'm going to leave that up for a second more so everybody can grab their phones and scan these codes. And then once I stop sharing screen, I'll also put them into the chat for you guys for ease of access.
And make sure you also join the Padlet just to share ideas if you have any questions that we may have.
Yeah, great. Okay, so for our main event, I'm really excited to introduce our speakers, our incredible guests today. We're very lucky to have Denisse Albornoz and Angela Chukunzira with us today. Denisse is the Deputy Director at the Engine Room. She is a researcher interested in the societal impact of technology, particularly on marginalized communities. Using justice and community-centered methodologies, she has co-designed programs with diverse groups, including scientists, artists, and activists, to mitigate online harms and advance the safe and equitable use of technology. Angela is a Mozilla Fellow and has been involved with social movements and their communicative practices in Nairobi, Kenya. She has also examined the intersection of labor within the digital economy, specifically with location-based platform workers and the invisible tech workers. She has previously researched on youth perceptions of digitization, unemployment, and what the future of work and work looks like. I'll now pass it over to Leslie so we can begin our formal presentations. Thank you.
Okay, can you guys hear me online? Okay. Some of my students are still coming in. I guess they have distance to travel. And some of my students look slightly puzzled because they've forgotten why we're doing this today. So just to remind you, as we have been discussing throughout this term about what this thing called AI is and what possible implications and impact it has on, broadly speaking, on development issues. And so we have been looking at various aspects of how, quote, AI is constructed. And we've been trying to demystify the notion that AI is not that magical, but AI in fact involves a lot of human labor in order for it to be possible. So we talked a lot about how all the data has to be collected, cleaned, classified, and then put into these fancy statistical analysis that generate the approximation of answers that you receive when you ask ChatGPT or similar kind of app. So we've been also mapping sort of the cartography of AI. You remember how we talked about how AI is actually involved with planetary scale kind of extraction. So today we're very lucky to have two researchers who have firsthand research knowledge of how these processes work. So when we talked about these invisible labor, how do we know about what exactly happened with the exploitation of their work and their cognitive labor and all these other dimensions, and what it means in terms of inequities and development. So Angela is going to talk to us about the particular research, and she's located in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm sure she will tell us the context of her research shortly. And Denisse have been very wide-ranging in her research interests. In fact, just to remind you, Denisse was actually a student in this course some years ago. So this is a full circle, I would think, and Denisse had been a collaborator with the Knowledge Equity Lab continuously, and I rely on her constantly for latest research and connections. So here she is again, coming back to our classroom to share her latest understanding of the impact of AI from a Latin American perspective. So let me then turn over. So the way it's going to go is that each of the presenter is going to give 15, 20 minutes presentation. And then there's going to be some question and answer, or actually Elham from the CLND will also give her commentary before we open the floor up more broadly to participants in the classroom and online. So if you have a question, feel free to use the chat, use the Padlet, but also feel free to raise your hand when we have the Q&A session. So there are multiple ways for you to stay engaged. And if we don't get to your question, we'll make sure we get to it somehow and get back to you. So do raise those questions. Okay, so Angela, once again, thank you for taking the time to share your research with us, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Even 5 years after the pandemic, I'm still always struggling with muting and unmuting myself. It's very difficult to get used to the Zoom, but as I was introduced, my name is Angela Chukunzira. I do live in Nairobi. My research is focused on I categorize them as tech workers because these are people who label the data for AI. So in 3 categories. So I work with data labelers who are building the AI system quite literally. And then I'm also working with content moderators. These are people who like flag content on social media. They check what before it goes on the platforms, what is appropriate, following some community guidelines for some ethical issues, And then I also work with platform workers who are location based, like Uber drivers, e-hailing riders and drivers as well. So my research focuses on how workers are organizing in this new era, because what has happened is like labor is shifting, and so they're not recognized by unions because people are no longer called workers. Personally, for instance, I've never ever worked in a full-time job that has like social protection since I started working. And this also marks like what work looks like, what work is shaped by. And it means that unions must also shift how they're organizing. Precarious people who are not having full-time jobs, people who are working constantly with contracts, and so because these people, most of the workers who are working for tech are actually not recognized as workers. There's a misclassification aspect, and so people always call them independent contractors or consultants or any other word but workers. But this is also very dangerous because it means that
people are losing their worker rights and increasing precarity across the world. And it's just because capitalism has a way of continually ensuring that people are used as commodities. So anyway, that is the long and short. That's what I work on. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with Nairobi, but it is the capital of Kenya. And it's also called the terrible word Silicon Savannah, which is the lack of creativity. And it's a way of ensuring that workers here are also trying to replicate what is happening in the global north, what is happening in Silicon Valley. So calling it the Silicon Savannah is a way of ensuring that, Nairobi can ape the West and not have its own creative outlets, not shape its own technologies. And these are some of the things we're resisting in terms of knowledge building, in terms of what does justice, epistemic justice look like. And so I'll just go straight to my slides. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so this is, as I've already introduced, I work with the 3 categories of workers, and I'll start with a quote by Malebo Sepodi, who is a South African feminist, and she says, when a group has internalized their oppression, they may find themselves unable to imagine living without it. And so this is how I also sometimes imagine how workers in Nairobi are getting used to it, because when you're working with people who are doing this data labeling work, this was the initial first job. And so people are not able to understand, workers are sometimes not able to understand their power. And if we're constantly being used to lack of social protection, this is what work looks like. This is what the future of work is shaped by, in the name of the illusion of the flexibility. You can work from home, you can work remotely. And yet these things come with a hidden cost, in the sense that, yes, you're working remotely and you're working from home. People used to work 9 to 5. Nowadays, people work 24/7. And, you can just see the gray areas of, like, people have a work laptop, but people now have to buy their own laptop or their own machines to be able to conduct this kind of work. So you see that the industries are shifting, and so people are starting to get used to this kind of to normalize this kind of oppression in the workforce. And this is what AI is doing. This is what new technologies and the new forms and new emerging forms of work are actually doing to workers' rights. Things that have been worn over the years, like we can't take for granted, for example, the existence of the weekend, and now it's no longer there. People are not seeing how it slips through their fingers, but it's no longer there. People are working all the time, including Sundays. People are working in their bedrooms. People are working, there's no space. And in a city like Nairobi, where it's choking with garbage, for instance, there's no social amenities, there's no green space. What does it mean for your mental health as a worker who works from home? So and just to demystify, as Leslie had introduced when he started this class, like, AI systems rely on an invisible workforce, and it's very intentional how they're making the workforce invisible. That's why it looks like this shiny thing, this amazing thing that no one even knows what it is like. And so we should actually stop calling it artificial intelligence, because it's not artificial. It's actually built by people. So this is people's knowledge, people's system that is being used to build this. And so AI isn't artificial or intelligent. It's made from the material world and the labor of millions. And most of those workers are actually based in the global south. In Kenya, most of these people are in Nigeria, in Venezuela, in the Philippines. And so it kind of mirrors the colonial logic of extractivism, that which we experienced. And I really liked how this session started by acknowledging the land in which we are operating on. And so when we think of AI as a system, this is the 4th industrial revolution and whatever it represents. But when you look at all the previous revolutions in the world, it's actually Black bodies and labor that has been powering them. Physically, Black people were exported from the continent to go and grow cotton fields in the US or in the Caribbean, and which is actually much less documented. We were actually also taken to the Middle East, at least for those of us that come from East Africa, which is a much less documented slave trade by the Omanis. And so we kind of see a replication of this system of racial capitalism, and it's very, very intensified with the growth of AI. And so I just randomly took these 2 images from the internet, because some of the workers I work with keep telling me constantly that whatever is African, whatever is indigenous, whatever is Black is almost constantly erased from the internet and the knowledge systems that are being built because they're building these AI systems. So the picture on the, I don't know if it's right or left, the picture on the left side of the screen is it's actually a dance from Eswatini, which is formerly known as Swaziland, and it's a reed dance. And this is a cultural dance where it's an annual event that happens, and I think it's replicated in other communities. I can imagine when I see this, I also picture the dances in Brazil, the carnivals, etc. And the picture on the right is a bikini, a Black woman in a bikini. But when I speak to content moderators, they're telling me the picture on the left will actually be flagged as nudity. And that will not happen to the same picture on the right. So it's also showing like which knowledge system, what is beautiful, what is acceptable. And if the picture on the left should be flagged as nudity, the picture on the right is surely nudity as well. But it's also what is European, what is Western, what is acceptable, and what is being internalized in our systems as what should actually be the knowledge, whose knowledge is actually being accepted in AI and whose knowledge is being prioritized, right? And so I have like 3 guiding questions for this. Who labors to build AI systems and under what conditions? How can we make this labor visible and dignified? The workers that I work with at the Africa Tech Workers Movement, which is a movement that we are trying to co-create with civil society actors, with trade unions, with traditional trade unions, is like they constantly remind me like this is only African intelligence, and we need to make it visible. We need to make it seen and known by people. And so, but the question I would pull out is how can we make this labor visible and dignified work? And then what resources are extracted to power AI from where? And what cost to community and ecosystems? Like we've seen like what is happening in the building of data centers, what is happening to communities, for instance, in Memphis, in the US, which are actually already disadvantaged communities, but it's bringing a lot of pollution. When you think of extractivism, when you think of what is happening in Chile, what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the rare earth minerals for this building these AI tools are actually found. What does it mean for their labor? What does it mean for women, for instance, marginalized people? Because when you think of lacking water because we are powering AI systems, what it actually means at the bottom of it all is that women who already do the invisible domestic labor at home will have to add another task of looking for water, which is, again, an added disadvantage to already marginalized people who actually their work, even domestic work, is not recognized as work. And how can workers, communities, and organizations build alternatives rooted in solidarity and justice? Because one thing that is very apparent to me when I'm working in these AI systems is starting to see like this is a global struggle. There's no way you can say that you're fighting against big tech in Kenya and you're not talking about the Philippines, you're not talking about Venezuela, you're not talking about Mexico, you're talking about the communities in Memphis. Like this is totally a global struggle, much as it manifests very differently in the different contexts. And so extractivism has 3 forms. There is resource extraction from land and ecosystems, as I mentioned, what is happening in the people who are losing their water systems, communities getting disenfranchised, labor extraction from marginalized workers, which is happening in Kenya, and then the data and knowledge extraction from communities. This data and information that is being taken from people is not being acknowledged, right? It's just being like, this is AI knowledge, this is what the new knowledge is. No one is saying that this information comes from this source, and we acknowledge the source of this information and this data. And so, yeah, as I already mentioned, there's like the issue of energy and carbon, and it's countries in the global south that bear the brunt of climate change. Even before the digitalization, it was like whatever is happening because of colonialism and extractivism, the climate change drastically affects the countries in the global south. and there is a water issue where, these AI systems need a lot of cooling. You might have heard that, it takes a bottle of water when you search something on ChatGPT instead of searching it on Google or whichever search engine. And then there's the rare earth minerals that are extracted from Chile, DRC, etc. So AI is in magic, as I said, like these are trained by workers who are doing so-called ghost work, content moderators especially, have experienced a lot of trauma. Most of them who moderate this content, there was a case in Kenya that sued Meta in 2022, and the state is actually supporting big tech because they're saying these are people who are providing jobs. In November 2024, there was a case, a law that was passed, that was proposed, that was called Business Amendment Laws, which actually protects big tech companies locally, that they will not be sued by Kenyan jurisdiction, because content moderators actually sued Meta because of the psychological trauma that they're experiencing, because they are exposed to nudity, they're exposed to pornography all day, they're exposed to people being butchered. Some people are seeing their own family members dying in Tigray, in Ethiopia, and some of them have permanent insomnia, permanent PTSD, and other psychological issues, and there's no psychosocial support. So these are just some of the things that come with this kind of labor, and the working conditions are actually very precarious. There are no employment contracts for most of them who are working, especially behind platforms. Platforms actually close shop. They leave Kenya, and there's nothing someone can do. You had done some tasks, there was some money there, and the platform has closed. So what happens to you? And the payment is delayed or withheld. There's algorithmic control, and sometimes there's this super surveillance where software is installed in their personal computers. So these people are working from home, but their whole environment is being surveilled. And you can imagine someone is working from their bedroom, their partner is there, their children are there, and there's this extreme surveillance. There's a psychological trauma from disturbing content. As I mentioned, some workers are experiencing a lot of, even down to their personal relationships, because they're exposed to pornography all day, and it affects how they see intimacy with their partners. And so it causes marriage problems, it causes relational issues, how you view your sense of reality is completely altered, because some people see like child pornography and they don't want to get children, or it scares them, all these things, that your sense of reality is completely altered. How you see the world is a very different place. And then there's isolation, where workers never meet colleagues, especially when you think of data labelers who do not work in a business process outsourcing firm. They work from home. What does that look like in terms of unionizing? And like one of the things I think is a thing to change your mind is freedom of expression is mental health care. Freedom of association and assembly is mental health care, because you're able to talk to your colleagues, you're able to share your experiences. And I feel like that is also a way of decolonizing mental health, because when you talk of mental health, some of the solutions that are always proposed is therapy, which is a very Western individualistic way of solving a problem, rather than building it through a community. And yeah, people are fired instantly. Yeah, so there's, I think I'm running out of time, but there's surveillance capitalism. What is happening in terms of data knowledge and data and knowledge extraction is the capitalism, and our behaviors, relationships are harvested without consent. So as I had mentioned before, someone has a computer, they're working from home, it surveils their house, it checks how long are you working, how many hours were you typing, all those kind of surveillance that also really regulates behavior in a way that is very negative to your own mental health and to your idea of work-life balance. And then indigenous knowledge theft and erasure, as I had shown the picture before, like of what is being erased. Like when you search Kenyan foods, barely will you see anything. It's just Western foods, pizza, spaghetti, whatever. And we're not even seeing cultural knowledge that is very key, and, spiritual stuff, African spirituality that is vital to ensure that we protect the environment. For example, there are some trees that are sacred, and it's a way of ensuring that the environment is protected. And then creative labor appropriations. I've seen like songs being created on AI, which for me is very cringe, I would say, because what happens to artists? What happens to art? You know, the humanity of art. Art is what makes us human, and so this is actually quite disturbing. And yeah, this just shows like demystifying the AI, that is something magical. There's actually mining and manufacturing of the chips, and then there's a labor of data creation, co-creation, and then there's an infrastructure that is being used, and profits end up only in Silicon Valley. So it's like a triangle of, this is where we'll extract from, and then this is where the profits will get to. And it's not distributed. And then, so I'm just about to finish. So my question to the listeners is, who benefits from AI systems, and how can we center the marginalized voices, local context, build solidarity across communities? Because this must be a transnational struggle. This must be a global struggle. And how can we create and imagine what is technological futures? And then some of the resistance that I'm documenting is worker organizing across borders. The Africa Tech Workers Movement is an example that I've shared, is what we're constantly working on. So we're forming, it's outside the traditional union, but also thinking of alternative spaces of organizing, because unions are also not accepting the changing nature of work. Unions are old institutions that must be challenged as well, and they need to change within themselves. And so this is very important for us to think of, what does the future of work look like, and how can we organize? Yeah, workers refusing unethical projects, because withholding their labor until conditions improve, because there's a lot of opacity within AI. Some workers are reporting that they're training military drones without their knowledge. They're training systems that they do not know what they're training for. You're told to take 15 pictures of yourself, Angela in sunglasses, Angela's at the beach, Angela in a bikini, and you don't know what those images are being used to train, right? Because they want to imagine how you can look in different contexts, without, and that is like violation of privacy. People do not understand what this data, the opacity of the AI system is actually an ethical problem. Yeah, and then building a worker-owned AI cooperative. I think one of the first AI worker cooperatives is being launched in November in Istanbul next month. So we are yet to see how this can turn out as an alternative to extractive AI systems. And then local AI, fair trade AI. I do not know, because I struggle with calling AI as it is now, like it's not an ethical system, like there's the ethics of use of AI, which we can use now, but I don't think we can say there's ethical AI at the moment because of how it's been built and how it's being constantly developed. And so the pathway forward would be to support worker organizing, Africa Tech Workers Movement as it grows, to build solidarity across nations, and to demand the supply chain transparency, as I mentioned, like the ethical issues of AI. You need to know, I'm training this drone to be used as a military weapon. Like we need to be able to understand what we are doing, right? And then build solidarity networks across borders, of course, investing in alternatives, advocating for regulation of this system. These are just some of the pathways forward. Yeah, and I think another AI can be possible if we work in solidarity with other communities and think of justice, knowledge justice, think of this as a collective knowledge system rather than an extractive one. And I think I will end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela, for that very comprehensive look in the invisible part of AI and the very high costs that we don't generally think about, the human cost and the social cost. I think that the line that stuck with me is about how extractionism break relationships. So maybe we'll come back to that. I know some of you have questions, but I would like to hold those questions until after Denise's presentation. Then we can ask the questions together and then have some Q&A from there. So hold on to your question. And again, just to remind those of you who came in late, there is a Padlet or you can use the chat if you are online to ask your question, and we can hold those questions and come back to it later if you don't want to lose your question. I would like to move to Denisse now, who will give us her perspective of AI from a Latin American perspective and other perspectives she'll bring to as well. Denisse, are you ready?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you so much. Let me pull up the slides. Can you see them well? All good? Great. Well, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be back at UTSD, at least in this way. As Leslie and Malika mentioned, I am a researcher, but I'm also a nonprofit practitioner, and I've been working at the intersections of science, tech, and justice for almost 10 years now, since I graduated from UTSD. And a lot of my research has focused on how technology affects and shapes knowledge production globally, how it intersects with power structures, and ultimately how it affects or impacts the well-being of diverse communities. I'm currently working at an organization called the Engine Room. The Engine Room is a nonprofit. We're a distributed global team of activists, researchers, technologists, community organizers. And what we do is we try to support, we do our best to support civil society organizations that are using data and tech in their social and environmental justice work. And we do this through community-centered research and capacity building programs. But I think what's most exciting for me about the work that we do is that ultimately what we're trying to do is contribute to creating more equitable and sustainable societies. And we want to do this by supporting the reimagining and the redirection of tech and data so that it is community-centered, social justice-oriented, and transformative and healthy, not only for our communities, but also for the environment. So a big part of our work really is to work with activists, collective social movements that are doing this reimagining, that are experimenting with technologies that are built for care, for solidarity, for self-determination, as opposed to control, extraction, and profit, as some of the great examples that Angela just shared. So what I want to do today is reflect a little bit on what this perspective means when we think about AI, this perspective around reimagining from a justice lens, from a plurality lens. And I will want to do two things. First, I want to amplify some of the work that is being conducted by community organizers across the globe, not only Latin America, we also work a lot in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's a lot of really interesting work happening that is inspiring me and inspiring our team to think about questions around AI and power from a more expansive perspective. So I want to bring these examples to you and let's see what happens and what questions and reflections they prompt for you. And then I also want to share some of the community-centered strategies that we use at the Engine Room to prompt this reimagining, because the reimagining is a very material collective practice that needs to be designed, needs to be protected, needs to be around. The first, and I will go through each of them, but the first is around considering the narratives that might be restricting our imagination about AI. Can you hear me well? Because I got a notice that my connection is unstable. So maybe
you were cut out temporarily, but you're back.
I'm back. Okay, if I leave again, let me know and I can repeat. But as I was saying, I want to share some of the strategies that we're using in our work to prompt that reimagining. The first is to consider what narratives are restricting our imagination about AI. The second one is on reimagining ourselves as well as AI experts and reflecting on the embodied expertise that we already have about AI. And finally, experiment with AI, with different forms of AI from a lens of justice and plurality. So I'm going to go through each of these strategies, and you are welcome to also try them with your communities, try them with your organizations. The idea is for, as Angela was saying, we need to start building more bridges on how to have these conversations and what are some of the strategies that we can use to disrupt the concentration of power that we're seeing in the development of AI. So the first strategy, thinking about narratives. So I will not go back to all the history of AI, but just very quickly, I think that you've already been reflecting about this with Professor Chan, but when we're talking about artificial intelligence, we are speaking about a specific set of technologies that have been developed at least since the 50s. It really depends how back you want to go in the development of computing and programming, and also whose histories you are centering in this going back. But let's say that at least since the 50s, we've been seeing the development of technologies to process data, to analyze data, to find patterns, and to make decisions based on these patterns. And today we're speaking a lot about, today in the world, we're speaking a lot about generative AI, large language models, but it also includes tools like predictive analytics, image recognition, natural language processing, a large set of tools that have multiple applications across different sectors. And what we have seen in the past few years has been a jump in what a lot of these technologies are able to do, because we have more data, more computing, more labor, as Angela was mentioning before. And we have more sophisticated models that has led in some communities to a very strong techno-optimism and very bold claims about what AI can do. And a lot of these claims usually speak about AI as if it was an entity. So here, for example, there are some headlines about how AI, all by itself, will feed the world's hungry and will make our world more sustainable. And there's also lots of headlines about AI being inevitable, something that is just happening and that none of us has really any control of. And the narratives that we hear about AI, and I think that's for us, that's the first step or the starting point, because these narratives will shape our curiosities, our aspirations, our expectations of the technology. It will shape our fears as well. And it can ultimately shape the way in which we can imagine this technology in a narrow or an expansive way. So one of my favorite projects, and this is the first one I want to amplify, that looks at AI narratives, is a project called Better Images of AI, that is specifically dedicated to challenging AI narratives and also images, what images come to mind when we think about AI. And they define AI narratives as those stories that shape our understanding, design, and application of AI, and that can influence how we perceive its potential and limitations. And to that, I will add that it can also shape our perceptions around who has the power and the ability to design AI, to contest it, to evaluate it, and to even talk about the technology with confidence. So I want to give you very much a glimpse, but give you 3 quick examples of some stories that we might have been hearing about AI for the past 2 or 3 years that have a lot to do with how we perceive power. The first one is this idea, as you saw in the previous slide, that AI is inevitable. The idea that resistance is pointless because AI is here to stay and that there's nothing that we can do about it. You are probably familiar with Ruha Benjamin's work, and she, in one of her essays, The New Artificial Intelligentsia, she observes how AI has become narrative-wise a bit of a predestination, with all the ethical issues just becoming an afterthought, but just a lot of the narrative centering on the fact that the technology is here to stay. And the issue with this narrative is that it erases choice. Choice also from the perspective of all the choices that were made in the design of AI, what data was chosen to train the AI, what values were chosen to encode into the model itself. So when we frame AI as inevitable, we erase accountability for the choices that have been made and also for the choices that we still have. We still have a choice to refuse to adopt AI. as it is being offered to us in some instances. So challenging this narrative involves reclaiming choice and remembering that other paths are possible. The second narrative is the idea that AI is too complex. And yes, there are some AI models, particularly deep learning models, that are opaque and that lack transparency. And this is a real issue, as Angela was mentioning before. But focusing only on these complex black box systems can overlook the wide range of AI applications that exist, that maybe some of them are more linear, some may be more transparent, and maybe easier for communities to interrogate and to adopt in different ways. And I think that this narrative also erases the fact that we do understand very well, because it's affecting our everyday life. For example, communities that have been targeted by predictive policing systems, that those communities understand deeply how AI predicts behavior. People who face algorithmic bias as a result of hiring systems can understand very well how it can limit job opportunities. If our accents are misread by voice recognition, or if a translation app distorts a language or an accent, we understand really well the linguistic hierarchies that are now embedded in the technology. And I could go on and on. So the issue is not really complexity, but it's also whose knowledge counts when we're thinking about the expertise that we have about AI. When we treat AI as something that only technical experts can understand and speak about, we're starting to erase the embodied expertise and the lived experience of those who are most impacted by it: the users, the workers, as Angela was sharing, the organizers that are building solidarity around challenging those harms. So how do we elevate this knowledge as well? And the third narrative is this idea that AI is necessary. And there is a claim that, for example, AI is needed to solve the world's biggest challenges: climate change, healthcare, education. And I do think that AI can support progress in these areas, or can support work that is being done in these areas, but using it is not always fit for purpose. And we also need to remember that there are other solutions that are maybe more effective, more sustainable, more impactful. Declaring it necessary also usually hides the trade-offs involved in its use. So the energy demands of using a very large AI model, the environmental cost of building data centers in areas of water scarcity, the reliance on low-wage gig workers that are labeling that data and working under conditions of exploitation. So framing it as necessary really turns a lot of the issues that we see, and you as development students are probably much better versed at this than me at this point, but this narrative really frames a lot of those issues as a technical problem, when what we really need is interdisciplinary approaches that may or may not include AI, but definitely do not include AI by default. So thinking about these narratives is a way of trying to understand how can we reclaim three things. How can we reclaim choice? Recognizing that saying no, slowing down, and doing things differently is still an option. Reclaiming plurality, widening our frame of what knowledge are we using, how are our experiences with AI, informing how we should build, assess, and use it. And also reclaiming our imagination, opening up space to dream beyond these narrow narratives and create room for other values such as care, justice, well-being. What does that look like if we center those values in how we think and build AI, and think about AI and start to build alternatives? So I will elaborate a little bit more on these, but this first strategy is not really a negation of the potential of AI, but it's a practice to take a step back and train ourselves to contest, to interrogate, and redirect the narratives that we hear, because ultimately these narratives are also supporting system power structures and legacies that we might want to challenge. So this is the first step that we use. The second step, or it's not really a linear process, but a second strategy that we use, I've already spoke about it, but how can we connect more with our own AI expertise to start building something different as well? So one of the things that we recognize a lot in our work, because we work with a lot of nonprofits, civil society organizations that feel really overwhelmed. So we really try to approach the idea of thinking about the impact of AI in our lives from a place of curiosity. We try to really meet people where they are, in their everyday encounters with technology, we recognize that people are feeling overwhelmed. There is information overload. There is a strong fatigue that people are feeling around making decisions and making sure that those decisions are values aligned. So here we really try to take an empathetic, non-judgmental approach to understand everyone's relationship with technology and how it's situated in a specific context, in a specific history, and also recognize that people have questions. There are curiosities about using a tool, but not necessarily knowing how to approach that specific tool. So what we do in our workshops is we often ask participants to take a pause and think about their own day and their own week, and some of the digital systems and the AI tools that they might have thought about integrating or that maybe they're already using. Sometimes we hear positive experiences. Sometimes we hear, I used a translation tool and I was able to communicate with someone that I couldn't have a conversation with before about work. Or sometimes we hear other types of experiences like, there's a new data center being built in the land of my community, and there are all these impacts that, as Angela already covered. So we really try to start from the experience of our community partners, and we approach this conversation from 3 points of view. We try to reflect about what is some of the knowledge that we hold in our bodies about how AI is impacting our lives. So here we try to think about, how is AI maybe affecting our creativity, our way of expressing ourselves, how we think? Since we started using an AI tool to perhaps write an email, is it affecting how I am thinking, how I'm framing my ideas, how I know what I know? It may affect how we move in a space using GPS technologies. It might affect how our bodies feel in public spaces, knowing that they're being surveilled or profiled. So we start with the knowledge that we hold in our bodies. Then we also ask our partners to think about knowledge that we hold as a community. How are these tools mediating how we relate to one another, how we communicate, how we express ourselves, how we're building relationships? Perhaps our knowledge ecosystem is changing in the sense of the information that we trust, or who do we trust as a result of the growing presence of AI in our communities. And then finally, we can think about our territories. What is the knowledge that we're holding in our relationship with the land? AI, and I think you've already covered this really well with Professor Chan, but AI can be framed as an abstract, immaterial tool, but the cloud is deeply material, and it depends on water and minerals and energy and land. It interacts with our environments. It can transform our own relationship with the resources that we find in our land. So thinking about the relationship with our territories can also inform how AI may be transforming the dynamics of our communities. So this is a workshop that we usually do with partners. It lasts an hour or so, but I just want to give you some examples of how there are other ways out there that people are visualizing relationships with AI. So because in addition to reflecting about the knowledge that we hold, is how can we articulate these relationships and make them visible so we can counteract some of the narratives that we talked about before. So some examples that we've seen from community partners is, for example, this artist Spencer Chang. They use a game called Everyday that uses, of course, sensors that we have in our phone to really create art that reflects our daily movements. And this really just makes us think about how we're really holding it all day, every day, and how our movements are being mapped. But there's an element of play that really allows us to engage with that idea in a way that perhaps doesn't feel so scary. We can imagine AI as a cartography of extractions. I think that you might have already seen these examples, but there are some really amazing projects that are trying to build maps of extractions and mapping the different agencies and resources that are involved, putting the human at the center as well of how we can imagine and how we can think about how AI is built. There is this other great project that I would recommend that does something similar. It's called Tech Cartographies by Joanna Baron, Bruna Zanoli, and Mari Tamari. And they do something really similar. They try to really flesh out some of the mineral resources that are being extracted for this technology to exist, and also map those geopolitical relationships that perhaps are getting strengthened as the concentration of power in some AI tools is being strengthened as well. And as I'm going through the examples, you can probably appreciate these are a series of choices of what do we choose to amplify and what do we want to focus on when we tell stories about how we as communities are engaging with AI. Then we have this great project called the Data Workers Inquiry that is very similar to the work that Angela was sharing, that really imagines AI as a day in the life of a worker, recognizing all the invisible human labor that goes behind automation, but also putting those stories front and center. So what this project does, it invited data workers to be the researchers themselves of their own experience and share their stories through zines, documentaries, comics, essays, so we can engage with those stories as well. Then we can imagine AI as a set of materials as well. So this is an art installation by a Chilean artist called Josefina Bushman. And she studies, for example, how AI systems are very material and we can interact with them. And she's trying to challenge this narrative around dematerialized cloud computing. But we can also imagine AI as a garden of possibilities. So there's this other great project called Tiny Tech Futures that is not AI specific, but the idea is how do we visualize an ecosystem that we can nurture and where we can cultivate care and awareness and humility, and what are some of the values that we want to center when we imagine tech infrastructures as well. So I've shown you these examples just to also spark a little bit your creativity, but just to really put a contrast in other ways that we can really use art and collaborate with community workers to think about AI in different ways that really resonates with our own experience as well and flesh out that embodied knowledge that we all have. So moving on to the third strategy before I run out of time, I think that also fleshing out some of the knowledge from our bodies, our communities, and our territories can really also help us think about what type of technologies, practices, and relationships can emerge when we center this knowledge as well. So the way that we're approaching this at the engine room is to think about the idea of the pluriverse that I don't know if you've heard this term before. It is a term that has been widely used by social movements. One of the movements that has used it a lot is the Zapatista movement in their call for a world in which many worlds fit. Thinking about a pluriverse is really a response to the imposition of colonial, patriarchal, capitalist, and anthropocentric systems that prioritize extractivism, profit, and not the real issue, but one of the big pushbacks here is against this universalism, and they call it a violent universalism that erases different ways of seeing and knowing the world. So when we call for a pluriverse, we're calling for how can we reclaim diversity of communities, of experiences, of systems that really allow different forms of technologies to come to existence and to thrive. So this is also something that we keep very in mind when we think about the context in which AI is being deployed. It's a context of technofascism, a context of authoritarianism, in which a lot of these tools, as Angela already shared, are being used to surveil, to censor, and to also isolate us. So how can we really nurture this ability to reimagine? It can be really hard. It can be really daunting when we're doing this in that specific context. And the words of Karen Howe, who wrote Empire of AI, she really calls for the centering of communities in this process and also working with them to dream up alternatives that could bit by bit remold the world toward one in which we want to inhabit. So what does this look like in practice? At the engine room, we are exploring a lot the idea of what an AI pluriverse can look like. What does it mean for different tools that are designed and sustained by communities, that weave anti-oppression strategies into their creation, that support collective care and interconnectedness within the design? What does it mean to nurture these tools as well, and to also create spaces in which these tools can be used to support justice work as well? What we've been doing is a general mapping of tools that are coming up, and hopefully we can share more about this. So if you're interested, visit our website. But I will just give you a glimpse of some of the examples that we've found a lot of inspiration from. So we are finding, for example, examples of energy efficient AI. So here on the screen, you can see a prototype that uses tiny machine learning and microcontrollers, which involves essentially running small models on low-cost hardware, which is feasible in resource-constrained environments, but it's also an example of how AI can be also local, and it can be frugal, and it can be energy efficient when it's designed within the context, when it's fit for the context where it will be deployed. We found examples of feminist AI. So in Mexico, there is a project that combines different forms of data and knowledge systems to analyze resource management. So they combine, for example, storytelling, art, audio with AI analyzed satellite data. So this is an example of how AI can be used to perhaps strengthen or complement, but not replace traditional knowledge systems. In Africa, we're seeing a lot the rise of smaller language models that are, for example, designed with a specific intention of decolonizing knowledge and decolonizing science, and also the over-representation of hegemonic languages in AI systems. We have worked closely with a partner that co-created a chatbot for technology facilitated gender-based violence survivors, but it was co-developed with youth, with the LGBTQ1 AI movement, with sex workers, with migrants. And of course, the design reflects that as well. And we have found examples of AI being used for forest monitoring, with the community really leading on the training and leading on how it should be used for resource conservation. And the last example is AI being used for speculation as well. So what we're doing now about reimagining, AI has been used as a tool to essentially try to spark new conversations about communities' hopes for the future, and try to visualize and articulate these visions by using AI artwork that is being prompted by the community itself. These examples are not perfect. They all may carry a lot of contradictions, but together what they show us is that there are small, plural, epistemically diverse approaches to AI emerging, and that they are possible, and they are showing how communities are also leading the way on the development and deployment of these alternatives. So as I mentioned before, the imagining part is a material practice, is a collective practice that we need to nurture. So how can we create space for these examples that I just showed you to also capture our imagination just as much, or if not more, than the large extractive corporate visions usually do? So I will just close with this quote by Ruha Benjamin, where she invites us to remember to imagine and craft the worlds we cannot live without, just as we dismantle the worlds we cannot live within. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Denisse. Every time I hear you speak, I have goosebumps because I'm so excited to learn about all these things that you're doing and learning from you all over again. So thank you for that. And again, just to remind the listener and the student why we're doing these webinars, right? Again, to put it back in context, as Malika introduced earlier, this is a partnership that we have with the OCIC, the Ontario Council for International Cooperation, which is really an umbrella group representing many other civil society organizations and NGOs across the province. And they deal with development issues, both far and near, and in all forms. And the other partner we have is the Center of Learning and Development, which is based in Regent Park in downtown Toronto. And they're the front-facing organizations that work with many different communities, including new immigrant women that come to Canada. And some of those participants are actually online today. They're part of the Immigrant Women Integration Project that Elham is leading. And I'll turn to Elham in a minute. But the whole overarching goal of this Knowledge for Change Hub is also to imagine how we can use more community-based participatory approach to better solve development problem, including this sort of pressing notions of AI that is being pushed onto us as being inevitable, but has been debunked so beautifully by Angela and Denisse. So really the objective of this series of webinar that will culminate in an in-person or possibly hybrid workshop in the new year is to engage in those kind of imagination, experimentation that Denisse alluded to. So how can we co-create and co-imagine other possible world in which AI serve us and not making us serve AI. So again, thank you for framing that so nicely for us to prepare us for engaging in these conversations. So why don't I turn this over to Elham, and Elham I just want to make sure there's enough time for Elham to express her perspective from Center of Learning and Development.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Denisse. Thank you, Angela. Listening to your presentation, listening to Angela's presentations made me realize how much human labor and resources go into AI, and often without recognition. Also, it was interesting to think about the people and communities affected by the AI. And yeah, as Denisse mentioned, AI narratives don't just shape what we think AI can do, but the projects that Denisse showed us show us that AI systems don't just serve communities, but are actually shaped by knowledge, values, and needs of the community. And the community-led AIs that you shared, they were really interesting. Thank you both.
Elham, do you have any specific question you want to raise?
I have one question. Are there any platforms, for example, community-led platforms? Do you aware of any community-led platforms that people can provide feedbacks or report harms of AI, or request changes in AI system? Or
Denisse and Angela, did you get the question? So am I done? You're asking, Elham, whether there are existing platform or infrastructures that allow
community-led platforms,
community-led platforms
yeah,
that are already doing some of these community-driven development?
Maybe if I should answer Elham's question, at the moment, I do not know of any. Perhaps Denisse, who is doing much more community-led efforts in this work, might have some leads on this.
Sure. So some of the examples I shared towards the end, I think they're not necessarily, I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but it's not necessarily platforms that collect feedback, but there are platforms that, or a group of technologies that are developed with communities from the beginning. So in the design itself, they can consider specific needs, the context, the histories that need to inform the design of the technology. Perhaps to add another example for everyone to take a peek when you can, there is a network called the Feminist AI Network. That I'm just trying to Google it now, so I'm saying it correctly, the Global Feminist AI Network, that they have also a bunch of different case studies of how we can design AI differently and imagine AI differently. And it's really exciting to see because there's a wide diversity of communities that get involved and that bring a different set of questions to the development of the technology itself. The examples that I shared around the development of small language models in African languages, those are really exciting as well. So I think that part of the message I was trying to get across is like, let's not let ChatGPT to capture our entire imagination, because of course there are, as Angela shared, there's so many, it's not an ethical tool, but there are other alternatives that are emerging from the ground up that have a very different set of values at the center, and just being intentional about finding those alternatives can be also a pathway towards learning how to best support them, how can we nurture those, or how can we build those ourselves as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Just to add that, so our next webinar, we're hoping to bring in a couple of indigenous system builders. They are thinking about AI from indigenous perspective. So how do you design AI without this overarching harmful universalism that Denisse was talking about, but based on relationality that is opposite to extractionism. So hopefully we'll learn some initiative. One of them is a Canadian-based initiative. The other one is in the US, but these are led by indigenous designers and system builders. So we should have some more examples to learn from. Now, why don't we open up the floor? Malika, can you check to see if there's any question in the chat or in the Padlet that we can bring to? Yeah.
Yeah, I see Kim's hand is raised, so I'm going to pass it to her. I think she has a question.
Oh, sorry, Kim.
No worries. I know I'm watching the clock and know we're almost done, so I wasn't sure. But first of all, wow, I've learned a lot, and I can't believe the wisdom that you're sharing with us today, all of you. So one of the things that some of the audiences that we have in common amongst the organizers of this webinar today is an interest in how to shape policy and advocacy from the community-led perspective. So that could be like youth that we work with, or the Newcomer Women program that Elham works with, or students, or civil society groups, nonprofit organizations. So I'm wondering if there's examples you could tell us about organizations or initiatives that are kind of leading in that space that we could learn from, of how to shape policy around AI.
I think Angela began by mentioning labor unions, so I think we can go back to Angela. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. At the moment, we're working with a group called dubbed Africa Tech Workers Movement, which was actually a response to, I may have mentioned before, the business law that was proposed to ensure that big tech companies are actually protected in Kenya, and that they're not necessarily, they cannot be sued. And for that, we are having we are working with some legislators, which is the initiative to kind of have legislations that protect workers' rights. But at the same time, there's also very big limitations with policies, because we have a very, how do I say this? The state does not necessarily pay attention to the rule of law. And so for me, what I'm thinking in terms of building a movement, building a workers' movement, is actually to ensure that workers are empowered from below, much as we have the best progressive constitution and the legal framework, but we must ensure that workers' actually have an understanding of their rights. And that's how I started this framework of like young people are getting into the workforce, not even understanding how work should look like, because we're already in a precarious state. People, I've never experienced work, for example, as I give myself as an example, I've never experienced like a contract work that, is long-term or anything like that. So what happens when you're thinking about something like pension? In the next 30 years, I'll be 60. What does that look like for me? Retirement, or, the excesses of capitalism must also be fought back by the workers' power themselves.
Denisse?
Perhaps, yes, I would highlight all the activism and organizing that is happening around data centers. We have been following closely, and we're collaborating with activists in Chile that are trying to develop strategies that some of them involve raising awareness with the community, but also building knowledge so they can influence policy as well. And as Angela very well said, mentioned before, it's a global movement. What is happening in Chile is also connected to what is happening in Spain and what is happening in Ireland and what is happening in Kenya around data centers as well. There is a lot of excitement, or not excitement, there's a lot of, there's a desire to share best practices, to share knowledge across regions and across movements. There's also some knowledge sharing happening between those who are advocating around data center or doing data center activism, but also collaborating with environmental defenders and trying to also connect with other social movements that have long trajectories of mobilizing also policy as well. So I think that we're at a time in which we also have to identify how to build those bridges and identify those connections that are local, regional, global as well, but are also across movements, because as again, Angela said, everything is connected.
Thank you. I'm cognizant of the time, and we've advertised that the online session will come to an end at 2:30, and we're approaching that. But I'd like to suggest that for those, and if Denisse and Angela is okay, stay for extra 5 minutes in case there's some pressing question that some folks didn't get to ask. And I know my students haven't had a chance to ask yet. So I would suggest that for those of you who have to depart, please go ahead, and then some of us can stay online if that's okay with Angela and Denisse, just for a few more minutes. Is that okay? Again, before we leave, I want to thank our partner, OCIC, with the whole team who's been making this event possible. And of course, I have to thank Malika for doing all the heavy lifting, the organizing, and all the logistic and all the write-up and all the promotions and all those kind of things. A lot of work. Thank you, Malika. Much appreciated. And I'll thank you on behalf of my students as well. Okay, so should we continue with a question? Anybody from the classroom have a question? Come on.
There's a question in the chat. Can I read it out?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's from Mishka. Should global development agencies and governments slow down the adoption of AI, and can they actually do this until stronger ethical or policy frameworks are in place, or is experimentation necessary to move forward?
Denisse, you want to, or Angela, you want to take?
I can start. I think that we need simultaneous strategies. I don't think that one necessarily needs to come before the other. I definitely, as you heard in my talk, I think that experimentation and kind of widening our perspectives and our experiences with AI is really important. Just so we also support smaller developers that are trying to do things differently, but usually do not find the funding or do not find the communities to support their technologies as well. In a very different project, we also, at the engine room, we looked at alternative social media, and there was a very strong parallel there. There are alternatives to corporate social media, but if the community is not there and the funding is not there, they will not be sustainable. And we're seeing something similar with AI as well. So I think that the encouragement around experimentation and adopting alternatives is really important to make sure that those alternatives can thrive and can support the communities that they're designed with, for, and by. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some important policy advocacy happening at the same time. I don't necessarily think that it's not so much for me around slowing down the adoption, but also raising awareness about the implications and the trade-offs, and really making sure that people can make intentional decisions around the AI's the AI tools that they choose to support. And that will, I think, hopefully lead to a slowing down from the uptake as opposed to a top-down slowdown. That was tried last year and it didn't really work. But I don't know, perhaps Angela has better strategies to suggest there.
Not really. I do not have a better strategy, but I think in terms of advocacy for an ethical AI, that is something that must be on the forefront. Like, because when you think of countries adopting an AI strategy, for instance, like Kenya has an AI strategy, and one of the things that is mentioned in the AI strategy is actually these companies that are oppressing the local population. So, like when workers' rights are actually oppressed in the national AI strategy, what does that look like, So the governments must really push for, not governments, but rather civil society must push back against the unethical, the problems that come with AI, but at the same time, yeah, as Denisse mentioned, I think they must go in tandem, and you have to allow people to exercise their agency in terms of what they want to adopt, but give them information so that all these decisions that people are making are actually informed decisions.
Denisse, when you were talking about all these interesting examples of creative reimaginations and resistance, I want to mention that our students are doing a project of mapping their own AI bodies with AI, and to kind of use the cartographic approach to map out their relationship. And I'm looking forward to seeing how they imagine themselves within that system of relationship as well. Just want to mention that. But I think there's someone from my classroom have a question. Evie, you want to come up?
I want to thank Angela and Denisse for this presentation. It was very informational, and I was trying my best to type as fast as I can and get all the information, so thank you. One question that I had was, like, again, I learned so much, and especially about, the black boxes and invisible labor and everything that's going on behind AI. And as a lover of science fiction myself, it was very, very nice to hear about that. And my question was, but how do you avoid like fatalism as well? Hearing about all these bad things that are happening, how do you avoid people kind of seeing AI as well as this like all evil, and kind of mending both there is some bad practices going on, but we can do better. Because I know, like, us humans, we have, like, every time there's something new with technology coming up, we always go towards like doomsday. How do you avoid that in a way? Thank you so much.
Thank you. The camera is tracking me. It's creepy.
Can I go first, Denisse?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think it's very important for us to also think of technologies as, the good things that happen. Like Denisse really spoke of how communities can be at the forefront of building these AI systems, alternative imaginations of what AI can look like. And AI can be very useful like any other technology. And so these are some of the narratives that we need to balance. I know like science fiction can write very good stories about what AI can do, the possibilities of AI in terms of advancing the human race. Like, I think there are some amazing stories on AI. Like when you see the movement, when Denisse was doing the presentation of where you can see your movement the whole day. Like, I think those are amazing things that, we should also highlight, because for me, who works in the doom hell of AI, there are things that are really good about AI that also can help us to connect more as human beings, and build on those kind of narratives, also build on what are the main stories that are being highlighted.
Yes, I agree. Not much to add to what Angela mentioned, but I think that what is really tricky in this career as well, in development, but also in this line of work, and when you think about tech, is to stay hopeful. And it's a practice that I think I mentioned it a couple of times, that needs to be nurtured. It sounds abstract, but it's really, you need to make space for that. You need to protect that space of how are you, for example, with your own community? How are you staying hopeful and staying joyful with your community? That can be a really hard thing to do. So I think that in the case of my own work, I find a lot of inspiration from a lot of the stories that I shared with you, these different narratives, all the creativity that I see, and all the just how I just can feel my mind expanding by seeing what is possible, and that other worlds are possible. And that's why I'm really inspired by the pluriverse concept, thinking about a world in which many worlds fit. We don't need to choose one pathway. Many worlds can be possible at the same time, and we can make space for that diversity. But yeah, as I mentioned, it's a material practice. It starts with having good conversations about it and just kind of bringing people together and resisting also the isolation that can be, as I mentioned, a strategy of technofascism as well. The less we talk, the less that we come together, the easiest it is to feel that sense of this despair. So it can start as small as that, but I would highly, highly recommend nurturing that, because I think it's what makes the movement sustainable as well.
Well, I think we should end on that very hopeful note. And and you know what makes me hopeful is seeing young people like Malika and Angela and Denisse and all of you who are engaged with these kind of social activism. I think this is what I want you guys to think about. I mean, the world is not inevitably in terms of control by big tech. You all have a voice. You all have agencies, and you can all work together collectively to be more powerful. And this is what gives me hopes. And so I really, really appreciate all of you for sharing those possible pathways forward. And this is the beginning of many conversations, right? So let's keep this going. And I hope my students, even after this class, will continue to stay engaged, because this is not something that you can just shut off after this course. Okay, so thank you again, everybody. My class will still go on for another 15, 20 minutes, but I will say goodbye to everybody, and thank you once again for all the work and efforts we put together, and see you on at the next event.
Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar. Please take a moment to complete the short evaluation survey shared in the chat.